Hello guys. So, I made steps to fix the lighting issues we've been having. So, hopefully the lighting doesn't go in and out. I know some of you were saying the lighting went in and out. So, hopefully not going forward. I'm shooting at night, so maybe the day affects it. I don't know, but um, let's see how this works. So, I don't usually write anything on the board before I begin, but we are going into a part of American history known as the era of good feelings. Why it is called the era of good feelings is one party rule. One party rule. And what does that mean, guys? That one party basically controlled the government in America during this time. And a renewed nationalism. So, a renewed sense of nationalism also played a role in this era of good feelings. Everyone was getting along. We were jiving. We were jiving as a country. So let's talk about the era of good feelings. And and this is in the video lesson James Monroe. So we're entering Monroe's presidency and talking about Monroe's presidency in the next few videos. So, as James Madison approached the end of his presidency in 1816, a fellow Virginian and Republican, James Monroe, was elected as his successor. Monroe's presidency was a continuum of the so-called Virginia dynasty, since all the presidents between 1801 and 1825 were from Virginia. The fading Federalist Party ran a candidate in the 1816 election for the last time, securing only 34 electoral votes compared to Monroe's 183 votes. Monroe came to the presidency with a solid political background. He had served as a U.S. Senator. He was twice the governor of Virginia. He was President Madison's Secretary of State, and he had also served a short time as President Madison's Secretary of War. He fought in the Battle of Trenton during the Revolutionary War at the age of 18. Monroe was not considered a president with outstanding intellect, nor was he considered a strong leader, but he was regarded as extremely dedicated, level-headed, and sincere. So he had those three qualities going for him. And I want to sort of list them so we can track. Dedicated, level-headed, level-headed, and sincere. I want to see how Monroe functions as president, knowing those three qualities that he had: dedicated, level headed, and sincere. Whatever his limitations, he surrounded himself with promising Republican leaders, including John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State and son of former Federalist President John Adams, William Crawford, and John C. Calhoun. So he had a reliably strong cabinet to give him decisions and help him make thoughtful decisions. Monroe's presidency spanned the end of the Revolutionary generation and the emergent era of nationalism. The country was at peace and the economy was thriving when Monroe embarked on a goodwill tour of New England shortly after his inauguration in 1817. So that's where we're at in American history. We're in 1817. He was warmly welcomed everywhere he went, even Boston, which had become a center of wartime dissent for the Federalists during the War of 1812. The Columbian Sentinel, a Federalist newspaper in Boston, went so far as to announce that the era of good feelings had been ushered in. The phrase has often been used to describe Monroe's presidency, but it is unfortunately somewhat misleading. Alright, we're getting into this. The first few years of Monroe's presidency was blessed with peace, liberty, and progress. However, the prosperity following the War of 1812 collapsed. The Panic of 1819 took hold, and a resurgence of sectionalism erupted. So this was the era of good feelings was really like a blip in American history, 1817 to 1819, and some historians stretch it to say 1820 as well. So the era of good feelings was from 1817. I'm not some historian, so I'll put 1819, a solid 2 years. That's when this era of nationalism really took hold. Alrighty. The Panic of 1819 marked the end of the economic expansion that followed the War of 1812. It featured deflation, depression, bank failures, bankruptcy, foreclosures, unemployment, a slump in agricultural and manufacturing, and overcrowded debtors' prison. It was the first national economic panic since Washington took office. Many factors contributed to the Panic of 1819, including a downturn in exports and strong price competition from foreign goods. The following prices impaired agricultural and manufacturing, triggered widespread unemployment. Another major cause was the risky lending practiced by banks in the West. The Second Bank of the United States tightened their credit lending policies and eventually forced these wildcat frontier banks to foreclose mortgages on count, countless farms and smaller high risk debtors. So this bank failure was in due of these banks sponsoring my wild, wild loan practices and not getting the money back in return after wild spending. So although this happened, the Panic of 1819 happened under President Monroe's watch. You would think he didn't get reelected his second term. But surprisingly, he had a sweeping win in 1820. That's why some historians drag that era of good feelings to include 1820 because he won all of the electoral college except for one. Sectional concerns over tariff issues, banking policy, sale of public land, and slavery began to divide the United States into three distinct regions: North, South, and West. So, if we were in if this wasn't an online presentation, I would show you the map of the United States. But the United States was beginning to divide. The North, the South, and North, South, and West. While the lines of sectionalism were being drawn, Henry Clay came up with a plan called the American System that drew upon the nationalism Americans were still feeling after the War of 1812. Clay's plan for developing a profitable American markets had three main parts: a strong banking system to provide abundant credit, a protective tariff to ensure successful Eastern manufacturing, and internal improvements such as a network of roads and canals. Clay's American system were meant to build the national economy and bind the country together both economically and politically. So Henry Clay wanted to capitalize on the nationalism that was being felt by Americans after the War of 1812. So he devised the American system. And three things to know about the American system. Strengthen the bus. What does bus stand for again? Bank of the United States. Two, internal improvements. Internal, actually that was three, but we'll just keep on going. Internal improvements. And what was number three? Protective tariffs. Protective. I want everybody to get those three down because this is super important before we start talking about sectionalism and all that. And I'm sorry this video is running longer than expected, but it's full of valuable information. Two parts of Clay's system were implemented: protective tariffs and the Second Bank of the United States. The third provision, internal improvements such as roads, faced fierce opposition from many within the Republican Party, especially Monroe. They objected on the grounds that the Constitution did not explicitly provide the federal government spending on national developments. President Monroe vetoed any bill that provided for funds for roadway or canal building projects, the National Road and Cumberland Road being the major exception, leading it up to the states to provide their own infrastructures. Before the War of 1812, duties averaged about 12.5%, and during the war, Congress doubled all tariffs. In 1816, when the additional revenue from high tariff was no longer necessary to fund the war, a new act kept duties at the same wartime level. The tariff was a protective measure because the British began dumping cheap goods in the United States, often at a cost far below that of American manufacturers. This protective tariff was the first in United States history, the first of many to come. The British were strangling American industry with their cut rate goods, and to protect the fledgling industrial sector, Congress kept the tariff rate high. The tariff issue created a clear sectional division. Eastern manufacturer, represented by Henry Clay, favored high tariffs that would protect them from foreign competition. Northern constituents, represented by Daniel Webster from New Hampshire, were against the tariffs because they feared it would attract their shipping trade and cripple their newly developing manufacturing business. Southerners resented the high price they had to pay for imports because of the high tariff, and they felt the tariff limited the foreign market for Southern goods by inhibiting international exchange. They began a long campaign against the duties, hoping that fair trade would revive the cotton economy. Southerners were represented by John C. Calhoun, who originally supported the tariff but turned away from it, claiming that it was enriching New England manufacturing in at the cost of the South. So from the get-go, because of Henry Clay's protective tariffs, we see this clear sectional divide between the North and the South. Let's see how the West fared. Westerns were split on the tariff decision. So they were split even in their own region. The Northwest favored high duties in order to protect its agricultural production, while the Southwest favored low duties for the same reason the Southerners did. They produced cotton, and it's all about the money in the South. That's what I'm gonna write by the South. It's probably all about money for the rest of them, but we are talking specifically about the South in the next couple of lessons. The South versus the North. Ever until the Civil War, actually. This sectional divide isn't going anywhere. The national banking policy was another important political issue. Although the regional lines were less sharply drawn on this subject than they were on the tariff issue, Northerners voted against a recharter of the Bank of the United States, while the Southerners favored the institution. Westerns favored the new bank before the Panic of 1819, which created open opposition to the institution. The Second Bank of the United States stopped allowing payments of debts in paper and instead demanded payment in in gold and silver coins, the gold standard, and we won't resolve this issue until after the Civil War. Okay. Land policy in the early 19th century was another reason for sectional differences. In 1818, the government sold nearly 3.5 million acres of public land due to the lenient credit policy, which in turn led to falling land prices. Sectional attitudes were clear. The West wanted cheap land, while the North and South felt the public land should be sold for as much as possible. Northerners were afraid that the cheap land in the West would draw laborers, leaving the North with a shortage of workers that would force an increase in wages to workers put keep workers put in industries. So Slavery again came up. So slavery is the pentacle of what we are talking today about sexual differences. Slavery is going to come up over and over again. The leaders of the Constitutional Convention had made many compromises over what politicians at the time called slavery in order to get the United States Constitution passed. But now it's like, what? It's come up again. This issue came up again. In 1808, Congress abolished the African slave trade without major incident. And by 1819, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states, maintaining a balance in the Union. Most Northerners opposed the institution. In contrast, Southerners wholeheartedly supported and defended slavery, as did most of the West, since many Westerners came from Virginia, Kentucky, and other Southern slave states. So we are actually going to continue this conversation about sectional ties when it relates to slavery in part 2 of this video. I'm sorry this video was a little long, but important information had to be shared with you guys. Talk to you soon.